If you missed it, BYU schedules a home-and-home with Michigan State, 2016 at Michigan State. That's on October 8th. And then 2020 in Provo, September 12th. With that, we bring in Blaine Fowler. Blaine, BYU continues to schedule well. It was Missouri and then LSU, and now Michigan State. What do you think?
Yeah, it's exciting. And, all of the folks that said that BYU can't schedule moving forward, well, they're a little wrong and they're still a little right. Because here's the issue. We're still struggling to get great teams in November. And I get that. But you know what? I can deal with a lighter schedule in November, especially if we can keep talking Utah State maybe into playing later in the year, and maybe start talking Boise State into be a rival later in the year. I'm fine with that when you're playing Missouri and when you're playing Michigan State and when you're playing LSU. And I'll tell you what I really like about the Michigan State announcement is that it's a home and home. And, the LSU thing is something that ESPN put together and is going to be in Houston. And as long as ESPN is BYU's partner, they'll continue to get those kinds of games. But a home and home with a Big Ten team that is not just a Big Ten team, but one of the elite teams in the Big Ten the last couple of years, kudos to Tom Homo and BYU for putting that together. I think it's amazing.
On Media Day, Tom Homo sort of teased at, just wait for a little while from now. We've got some games. Now we're seeing these games kind of roll out. I imagine there are even more games, but which of the games that BYU has announced in the future is the most exciting to you?
I like the LSU game.
Me too. That's my game.
That's just when you think of the elite, and I know that LSU hasn't been in a national title game for a couple of years, but that's a team that every year, when you start to think about in preseason, start to think about, you always take a look at what LSU has coming back to see if they're going to compete for a national title. So there's not a year when that team, if they've got a good core coming back, isn't considered a national title contender. That's how good that program is. I would love to play them at LSU at some point. And maybe this leads to something more, because I've been in that stadium. It's unbelievable. One of the best home environments in college football that I've ever been in. And I've been at Georgia, and I've been at Alabama. I've been at Ohio State. I'm telling you, LSU is something special. That would be fun. But I'll take it in Houston right now, just because I think it is considered one of the nation's elite programs year in and year out. So that's what I'm most excited about on the schedule right now.
Blaine Fowler's on BYU Sports Nation talking BYU and Michigan State. If you missed it, BYU October 8th, 2016 at Michigan State, and then we'll host Sparty in Provo September 12th, 2020. We then kind of looked at 2016 in context, Blaine, and we're noticing that this is probably tougher than 2015. Listen to this. The start of 2016 right now. Neutral site Arizona, at Utah, UCLA at home, neutral site West Virginia, at Michigan State. The next 2 years are fantastically difficult at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, it's crazy, and they better be ready to go. And they need Dave's brother-in-law to be ready to go for next season with that September schedule. You need a veteran quarterback to handle that kind of deal. So next year they're going to have that, and you got to believe that Taysom's been snake bitten enough that perhaps he stays healthy this next season. And you know what? I like him coming back into an offense that I think really morphed into something much better by the end of the year. You hate to say that somebody getting hurt helps, but I think him going down and Christian Stewart going in there helped BYU rediscover some of the things that they can do with the offensive line that they have, with the receiving core that they've got coming back. And so now Taysom, and I recognize he's not going to be able to be a big part of spring ball because of his injury, but if they can use him in some of the drop-back game and then utilize him as a change-up in the run game, not as a steady diet of it, I think this team has enough coming back next year that they can make some noise with that September schedule. And if they can get through September 3-1, all of a sudden you can lose a game in September and be ranked in the top 20. That's how that schedule is. And you come out of there 4-0, now you've got some talk about, is BYU a team that can not only break into that New Year's Day 6, but break into the Final Four with that September schedule. So if those are the things you want to play for, guess what? The schedules those years are the kind of schedules you've got to play. If you want to be considered one of the nation's elite, you got to play it. And for BYU, right now they don't have the depth that LSU has. They don't have the depth that even a UCLA has.
They probably won't ever have that depth, right?
No, they just can't stockpile that. And so for them to have a special season with those kinds of schedules, they have to stay healthy. And as I go back, there were some great seasons with John Beck and Max Hall and those guys. But
and David Nixon.
And Dave Nixon and Brian Keel, Kellen Fowler. Those were some great teams. And top 15 teams, top 10 defenses that Dave played on. But if I go back where I go, when was the last time it was an elite team that I think could play with anybody in the country? And it might go all the way back to 96 when they played in that Cotton Bowl. That was a legit top 5 team.
Mm-hmm.
But you go back and you look at that season and go to the starting lineups game by game, and you go back to the stats, they were unbelievably healthy that year. Omar Morgan and Tim McTire started every game at corner that year. Every game. And so you got to stay healthy at BYU to compete with those guys. And sometimes that's just sheer luck. Sometimes you're just lucky to stay healthy. And that's what it takes to have a special season with that kind of schedule.
Blaine, when you look at this, BYU playing these P5 schools, and I've thought a lot about it. What position do you think needs the most depth when you start playing these big-time opponents? Do you think it's the secondary? Do you think it's down the trenches? I don't know if there's a correct answer, but I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think where BYU I think they made a step last year forward again up front, especially on the offensive line. When BYU's been really good, and when we talk about 96, and Dave, when we talk about the teams that you played on, we had a lot of great stars on those teams, but the bottom line was there were a couple of NFL linemen on every one of those teams. I'm talking about on the offensive line, and maybe even a defensive lineman or two that were capable of playing in the National Football League. And so to me, to compete at that level, you can't get beat up front and expect to win, even if you have stars in the back end and stars at quarterback and wide receiver. You've got to be able to hold your own up front. And so for me, that's where BYU needs to continue to improve, to continue to get depth, to push those guys that are starting. And linemen get nicked up, so you got to be able to have, on the O-line, you got to have 7 or 8 guys that can absolutely play flat out without a drop-off. And on the D-line, even though BYU plays a 3-4, they need 6 guys, solid guys that can rotate and keep fresh bodies to compete at that level. And so where do I think they need to be best? They need to be best there, and I think that it's still a work in progress. I do believe up front on both sides of the ball we'll see an improvement because a lot of young guys had to play this year. I think next year they'll be better up front, and then we'll see where it goes from there.
And Jeff Marston, recruiting coordinator for the BYU football team, earlier this week on Monday was in here and told us that very thing, that not as many playmakers per se in the recruiting class, but the emphasis on depth, especially at offensive line. Memphis announced, some of the Miami Beach Bowl brawl fallout. BYU is going to handle it internally. Blaine, I guess just your reaction to the announcement that, yes, it is being taken care of. Memphis went specific. BYU is going to handle it inside.
Well, I think that at some point people need to hear what BYU is doing. And I know BYU likes to just, hey, we do what we do and we do it internally. But the fact that Memphis came out and said, this is what we're doing. Now, I listened and I read the release, so I'm still not quite sure what they're doing. It was specific, but not specific enough for me to know, well, who are these guys and what is the community? What are they doing?
Right, and they'll announce that later, as will BYU.
Right, but so I do think that BYU's already talked about some things internally that I shouldn't talk about some suspensions and some things. I think eventually that needs to come out because if Memphis is going to come out with theirs, the public needs to know that yes, BYU is handling this, and they're taking it just as serious as Memphis is taking it, and there are repercussions for doing some of the things that were done out there.
Blaine Fowler's on BYU Sports Nation, and I imagine we'll find that out in August, maybe September. Let's get a basketball question in here as we have kind of almost – it feels like a bye week, but it's not. BYU doesn't play tomorrow. They play Saturday.
Yeah.
We were thinking this morning, who does BYU need back more right now, Anson Winder or Nate Austin, and why?
That's a tough one. They need them both back really bad. but I love what Anson Winder does, but there are other guys that can pick up the slack just a little bit with him. They're not going to beat him because he's so good on both sides of the ball. His lateral quickness allows him to be the perimeter defender for BYU. So that almost hurts more than his ability to push the ball and his ability to score. If Chase Fisher continues to shoot the way he shot the basketball against St. Mary's, I mean, that picks up some of the slack. He was really good in that game. And so there are other guys, and Skylar Halford can come in. It's not a huge drop-off. Don't get me wrong. They miss Anson like crazy, especially on defense. But there has been this gigantic void all season inside.
Yeah.
And it was never more apparent than in the St. Mary's game. I mean, Brad Waldo had 7 offensive rebounds, guys. BYU gave up 17 offensive boards. And so I think that he makes a difference there. I think that he's an excellent defensive rebounder. He'll go get you some offensive boards and some putbacks, and it just changes the way you do things. And so you think, well, he doesn't really score. Nobody impacts the scoring because he gets offensive boards and kicks it back out, gives guys like Chase Fisher a chance at another 3 try. He gets a defensive rebound instead of giving up an offensive board, and he kicks it out, and now you're in transition, and you get a transition bucket. So he affects the offense, not with his scoring, but with his defense and his ability to rebound. And so they desperately need him to come back and contribute. I think him maybe slightly more, but you know what? If they're going to make the run we think they need to make, and I think they can only lose 1 game at Gonzaga down the stretch, then they need them both back as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Blaine, we appreciate the time. Exciting stuff with the Michigan State news. We'll hear from you soon.
All right. Good to talk to you guys.
Thanks,
hey, I
Blaine.
miss you, Dave. I haven't seen you, Dave. I miss you, man.
Hey, feelings are mutual. Miss you too, man.
All right, buddy. We'll talk to you later.